everybody. I'm really excited to be at Remote Design Week. I can't believe it's already here. It's just really cool to be here. I can't wait to present. So I'm going to talk about onboarding as a tool for equity today. And, just to introduce myself, hi, I'm Tess. I am a design manager for Condé Nast, which is the company that brings you brands like Vogue and Wired and Bon Appetit and The New Yorker, amongst many others. I am a design ops team of one here, and I work with the whole product design team. So I concentrate on making things run smoothly so that the designers can design and the UX writers can write and the UX researchers can research and the team can get all of the awesome work done that they do. I have been working in tech for 18 years now, and I've been managing people for 10 years. But I'm actually pretty new to design ops and the design field in general. I built my career in the support world, and in some ways, I really think of myself as still an infant in the design world. So I'm still getting my bearings, but in other ways, there's not a lot that changes across disciplines, especially when we talk about things like onboarding new hires. Before this, I was at Tumblr for 8 years, which is like 94 years if we're counting in startup years. And I was director of support there for a chunk of that time. Before that, I was at a place called Media General, which is a company that owned a bunch of small, like Southeastern newspapers and news websites. And before that, some other local, smaller places you've never heard of. And I live in Richmond, Virginia, in a beautiful house that is 150 years old and has more aches and pains than you could ever possibly imagine. And I live in it with these three weirdos. And right now I am very into these particular things. So Halloween is coming soon, and I hope that if you're not already in the Halloween spirit, that you will get there soon. On to my actual topic. So talking about how onboarding is a big deal within the sort of equity scene. I think equity is a really big buzzword right now. We hear a lot about that term, and we hear a lot about leveling the playing field and how to best equip staff for success. And to me, most of the time when I hear these things mentioned, when I glance at an article about these things, there's a lot of talk about how we give raises and how we promote staff and how we hire staff. And those are really important topics. I mean, I think that those are massively, massively important topics. But one thing that I don't hear as much talk about, but that I think is also really important, is that onboarding piece. And I'm here to say that a consistent onboarding experience is a powerful tool for equity. You might not think about onboarding immediately when you do think about the whole experience of being on a design team or what ultimately makes you successful on a team. But, sometimes those ways that we measure whether a workplace is fair, like missing raises or promotions, those things that are kind of red flags that tip us off, they're more symptoms, of a journey that started all the way back at that person's first week of work. And inequalities in the workplace don't just happen one day when somebody doesn't get a raise or a promotion or doesn't get paid at all or whatever the problem is. Those things really start long before someone is passed over for a promotion. Let me put it to you this way. When I was a little kid, we would play this computer game in school where you were playing as a settler trying to travel across the Western United States to Oregon in a covered wagon, in a tiny pixelated covered wagon. And although it made no sense at all, and it taught very little actual history, I did learn one thing from it. Whether or not you reach Oregon successfully isn't just about whether you were able to hunt for game along the way. See those little pixelated deer? Or whether you forded the river successfully without sinking your wagon. or even whether or not you got dysentery. More than anything, it was about how good of a job you did stocking up on supplies at the store, all the way back east in Independence, Missouri at the start of the game. And I feel like onboarding is like this. If people feel out of the loop from day one, if they don't have all the supplies they need on day one, and they're continually having these, oh, I wish I had known about that resource or like this or that training or whatever it is, or this or that procedure. If they're constantly having those experiences, it affects their confidence and their perception of the job starting on that first week. So the way that I see it, the typical onboarding philosophy, and I don't just indict design teams on this. I think it is largely this way in tech or in any workplace. Hiring managers are really busy and they have just spent all this time sourcing candidates and interviewing all of them and then going through the hiring process with HR and getting all the approvals. And it's like by the time the new hire shows up, they're like, what do you mean onboarding? So the typical onboarding philosophy ends up being something like throw them in the deep end and see if they can swim. You've heard this before. Even jokingly in a conference room, someone's like, haha, first week, eh? We're just throwing you right in the deep end. And people are kind of laughing or whatever, but I guarantee you it's only half joking. Starting a new job is really overwhelming at all levels. And aside from having to participate in meetings and make real decisions with zero context or understanding, you can't remember who's who on the team, and maybe not everybody's Slack avatar is an actual picture of them, which makes it harder. And sometimes the corporate onboarding that happens tends to consist of, HR teams kind of rattling off a lot of really important information verbally, which means that when the dust settles and you actually need to sit down and look through the benefits package or whatever it is you need to look through, you're not going to remember where they even said to look for it. So there's always going to be this element of chaos to onboarding. I think that's to be expected. But the least you can do is equip people well for it. So we don't want to just add them to the right Figma files and say, okay, enjoy, see you at the next team meeting. We need to come at this from a place of intentionality. And the way that I see it, the keys to good onboarding are documentation, consistency, and iteration. You need airtight documentation that anticipates just about any question somebody new would ask. And you want to make sure you're applying your onboarding procedure really consistently. So regardless of whether someone's coming in physically to an office or connecting from their home, you can feel confident that they're having the same experience. So let's talk about documentation and personalities. One of the biggest pitfalls here is making it so that people go out of their way to find the things that they need. And if you don't have any of your processes documented, people are going to have to speak up a lot and ask how to do things. And if you don't know what the processes are to begin with, it's very difficult to ask questions about them. So you don't know what you don't know. And anybody who's been a new person on a team knows that. So in the business world, again, not just a design problem. I think this is a workplace problem. Sometimes we tend to reward people for having an extroverted, gregarious personality, like gregarious Greg here. People who are comfortable asking 100 questions and pulling the information out that they need. So everything from, hey, I noticed some people have access to this tool. Where can I get that? To the little just personal things like in an office setting, hey, I see you have a bagel. Where did you get that bagel? People who are just 100% fine asking for anything it is that they need and who feel very comfortable doing that. And then there's introverted Inez, who's a little more reserved. She likes a lot of time and space to process information, and she might think to herself, I'm sure that the access to that tool is coming soon. I don't want to bother my manager with anything else today. Or I just feel so weird asking where the bagels are. I'm just going to walk 20 blocks and get a bagel and eat it in utter solitude all by myself. Guilty. But bagels aside, people should be able to come into a new work team and successfully onboard regardless of their personality. So you don't want an experience where it all depends on how comfortable they are at yelling the loudest or at flailing around in the dark. If Greg and Inez are equally talented designers, who tends to onboard more quickly and more completely? And who ends up surviving a little bit better in general? Maybe there's a bias here and it tends to be the more extroverted folks. Those people who are comfortable with asking a zillion questions and who wouldn't even think twice about it. Like it's not even something that they need to get over. So asking questions is a good life skill. I just want to acknowledge that fact. But there are other factors at play here. I bet y'all can think of some other reasons why people might feel less comfortable just firing away with questions and requests. Maybe they're part of a group that's often been made to feel less than or pushy if they have a question. Maybe their language isn't your first language or the most prominent language spoken in that workplace, and they feel very conscious of that. Maybe they express themselves better when they can take extra time to write it out or make a list. Maybe in the culture where they come from, it feels sort of presumptuous to just put an hour-long Zoom on somebody's calendar to ask questions without asking for permission first. So all of those things are other factors that do exist and that don't have anything to do with how good of a designer they are, or UX writer or UX researcher. Some food for thought related to consistency is when new people start on your team, try to ask yourself these questions. Are they equipped with all the same information and tools? Now, this is going to vary from role to role, of course, but for the team-wide stuff, like does every new hire get to see the full picture? If you're a hybrid team, is there any training, either formal or informal, that people only get when they're in the office? How can you offer something of similar worth to remote staff, if so? Are cultural touchstones like team rituals explained thoroughly to new people, and is it clear how they should participate? I mean, it's one thing to say, hey, show up to our team meeting at this time on this day, but it's another thing to say, here's how you can submit slides to it. Here's how you can, submit your ideas or request, a topic to come up in the meeting or whatever it is. If the person has a disability, are they able to find any necessary accommodations pretty easily? I mean, I was listening to a talk at some point last year, and the person said, if you hired someone with a disability today, would you know it? How would you know it? And how would that person find out if they're going to be accommodated? And that really struck me because I was like, no, I mean, just transparently, I don't think that I would be confident about that. And that's something that managers and design ops folks should be thinking about. And then if your team members are onboarding from various different countries, are there places where the processes are slightly different? And have you called that out for them? Does this country use a different HR system than this country? Is the level of detail the same across any of the instructions they're provided, right? So, I mean, I will shame myself for this. I had a part in our onboarding that was like, okay, here's a list of people for you to meet once you join, and just put some time on their calendar, and everybody is expecting you. Like they'll know, that they're going to have a meeting with you. And at some point, someone kind of sheepishly admitted to me, hey, I don't know how to put time on people's calendars and see their availability. They just didn't have experience with the Google Suite, Google Calendar version, and clicking on the Find a Time tab and seeing when another person's free times line up with your free times. To me, that is like breathing because I've been doing this for almost 20 years. But for a new person who maybe came from a different industry or is just out of school or whatever, they're not used to that. And even just linking to a help documentation from Google or whatever it is, those types of little things go a long way to make people feel comfortable and find the info they need without having to ask so many gosh darn questions or push themselves out of their comfort zone yet another time that day. So another question to ask yourself is what's available in your general store? Going back to my childhood computer game story. The good news is that it's really easy, I think, to start assembling your resources. And you don't have to be a manager or design ops person to participate in this. What boss wouldn't be delighted if a staff member came up to them and said, "Hey, I started putting together a quick list of resources to help new people when they join." So I really think like even the most basic documentation helps. And every team's onboarding materials are going to be different, but a great place to start is just gathering everything in one place that exists. So things like tools and assets, procedures that are going to come up regularly in that person's day-to-day. What are the team rituals? How can they participate in them? Like I said, what's the team structure? Who are all these people? Where do they sit? And what does the overall structure look like? Training, access to any training that they can get their hands on. And important contacts, right? Because the question marks don't just end with like, hey, here's all of our documentation. There's got to be people to ask questions to when they want to extend this knowledge or find out more information about it. And so I think this is a really great start. This is a good shopping cart to have assembled. And I will say another tip is to ask a recent new hire to help you. If you are putting together onboarding resources, I think it's really, it's kind of like an obvious thing to go and ask like the most veteran person on the team, hey, you know all the answers to everything and you've been here for 10 years. Can you help me put together onboarding? But it's also really good to ask the most recent joiner. So the person who's only been here for a month, go ask that person, hey, what were the big giant question marks in your head during your first week? And it'll be really fresh in their mind and they will be able to point out some things that you and that other veteran person wouldn't have even thought about. So once you have the basics taken care of, you should revisit it often. And this is the iteration piece of what I was talking about. Ever heard of a little thing called the double diamond? Well, it's actually about onboarding processes. You heard it here first. But seriously, things change. So you should set yourself a Slackbot reminder to crack this thing open every couple of months and update any broken links. Regularly poll new hires and see what's missing. In fact, revisiting that same new hire that had helped you put this together in the first place and saying like, hey, have you thought of anything else? And how is this looking to you? And then going and asking any even newer people what they think is really, really helpful for just like your regular revisiting of this process. And it's also a really good thing to add to the onboarding process for new managers, asking their new hires, hey, what did you need help with? What's missing from our process? And that makes it all very meta. You got to talk about onboarding in the onboarding process. So, this is where I have to be very real with you and admit that I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that there is some outdated information sitting in my team onboarding right now. Just sitting there being all misleading right there on Confluence where it lives. But sometimes upkeeping tasks like updating your onboarding documentation, those things kind of fall by the wayside when you're in a season of really high workloads, really intense and rapid hiring, all these kinds of things that I think are facing a lot of design teams right now. So I'm not here to say that there needs to be this like frantic energy constantly being thrown toward onboarding, but I do think it's just like something to keep on your radar. And if you're only revisiting it every 6 months, that's better than revisiting it never. And you can always improve on it. So yeah, just a reminder that it's important and it needs to be upkept. From there are lots of ways to extend the awesomeness. So this is just like bonus round stuff, but turning your onboarding documentation into a really fancy handbook is one thing you can do. GitLab has done this and their onboarding is so good. They just like published it publicly. So you can go and check that out online anytime you want to and see a good example. It is truly a thing of beauty, but not everybody learns best from reading large chunks of text. So it's a good idea to mix it up. You could use a custom Slack bot like Donut to handle some of your onboarding tasks, like introducing people to their peers or assigning them an onboarding buddy. I actually administer a water cooler channel using Donut at work, and anybody in our org can kind of just opt into it by joining a particular Slack room. And it makes intros automatically every month or so. So you end up having a coffee chat with someone you would have never otherwise intersected with. And I think it really helps with siloing and with just like meeting interesting people. So it also throws icebreaker questions out into the channel every now and then, which are really, really fun to answer and see how other people answer. And then you can also focus on making connections with discussion and open-ended questions. And that's kind of another way to learn and to onboard. The pandemic forced a lot of companies that weren't thinking too hard about this stuff to get creative with their onboarding procedures, even Zoom itself. So this quote right here, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the interview that I read with the chief people officer at Zoom said that, they used to do the whole thing for onboarding where people travel, and show up at headquarters and, stay in hotel and all that stuff. And during the pandemic, they started using the tool that they make, which is Zoom, to do breakout rooms and polling and annotation so that new hires could meet each other and discuss topics and, kind of dig in beyond small talk. And I don't know, I really like the idea of doubling down on their very own tool that they themselves make. And I think there are lots of creative ways that all of you in the design industry could think of to use your own tools in that way. Another thing you could try is an interactive onboarding experience in a tool like Miro. So this is next level, and I have not gotten here myself yet either, but I mean, how cool is this? You can just go to Miroverse, which is where they store a lot of like cool templates that regular people like you and I have made, and you don't have to invent them yourself. So if you just go in and search like onboarding, you will immediately see all these examples that other people have created. And when I was kind of looking through these different onboarding exercises that are much more interactive than reading a doc, I was thinking, oh, how could I actually illustrate my onboarding process as a journey? How could I show people in a linear way how they're progressing through that journey, right? So it's not just about, are they learning everything they need to learn? Do they have the information they need? But also, do they have a sense of their own progress as they're moving through all of this? But those things are, kind of extra credit, admittedly. And I really believe that when you come at onboarding from a place of intentionality and you focus on documentation, consistency, and iteration, you will bring a better aligned, more equitable onboarding experience to the table for future new hires. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Feel free to ask questions now during the conference or connect with me on LinkedIn and Twitter. And, if you have any cool onboarding experiences or resources or examples that you know about out there, please send them to me because this is just kind of like a pet interest of mine. Thank you so much.